Good afternoon, Chairperson, members Garrett and Bollendorf, staff and guests. The lobbies are open and the recording has begun.
Thanks. We will convene the executive management team meeting for Wednesday, August 14th, 2024. First item on our agenda today is an executive session for the board to discuss pending and potential litigation with our legal counsel. I expect this will take 30 minutes. And that we will come back. If it has to be extended, we'll let you know. If it finishes before, I think we will stand at ease till 1:30. And with that, if everybody will just stand by so we can go into executive session.
So
Got a meeting.
we have a meeting.
Yeah,
This week. I asked to have that set up, and I think that actually some of her concerns, they may actually.
I'm sorry. We are done with our executive session, but we're scheduled to end it at 2, so we're going to stand at ease for 8 minutes. Thanks, everybody.
So let me fit into the current conversations with our current draft. So we'll see if that plugs in or not. That was, we're trying to get that conversation sooner than later, so we have a chance to look at it.
Yeah.
Because the thing
Okay, we are back to the executive management team meeting regular agenda. Our first update comes from legislative director Mark Webster.
Well, good afternoon, Chair Postman and members Garrett and Volodroff. I am just back from vacation, so I'm sorry that I don't have a ton to report at this point. I do want to give a very brief update on our agency request agenda. We currently have 2 draft bills that are back from the code reviser. We have a statutory cleanup bill, mostly impacting licensing, and thanks again to Becky and her team for supplying the ideas kind of within that. Remove some unused privileges and a license type, and really tries to clarify when and where mask permits are required. This may shock you, but RCW is not always crystal clear as it should be or could be, and this is an important kind of public safety impacting topic, so it's worth doing it right. You know, if you're serving alcohol to customers, you need a permit. Doesn't much matter what license type you're serving in, from grocery store to tavern, beer and wine restaurant, whatever. It matters what you're doing. So that's just kind of what we're trying to get at with that bill. Second, we have a trailer bill on the medical cannabis excise tax exemption. We just need to ensure that our audit team has access to the information that they need to do their job. Specifically, we need to make sure that they can trace exemptions to legitimate patient cards. And again, this is not about tracking patients or purchasing, but just rather making sure that they can make sure that the sales are legitimate. We couldn't do it if we wanted to kind of get down to that patient level. So the Department of Health and the Department of Revenue are allowed to share information statutorily to ensure that the sales tax exemption is kind of working appropriately. We're just trying to get an add-on that they can share that same type of information with us for the excise tax exemption. And we really want to hear from stakeholders and others on these topics. It's not too late for anybody. We can absolutely incorporate good ideas from industry, from rights holders, advocates, citizens, whoever. We just need to hear from you. Write to any of us. This group talks regularly. It's not just for TBW. We genuinely want to get the policies right. And then finally, it is mid-August, but this agenda is subject to change. Couple of ideas. I don't know that they're kind of rising to the level yet, but it could happen. We could certainly have an additional bill or 2. More on those as those plans firm up. But I just want to put it out on the record that we could have more. We've certainly talked with this group about a product placement bill. I think, and I'm looking to the director here, I think the more likely approach is probably going through rulemaking. But again, that's an example of something that could move from that rulemaking into the legislative agenda. But all that's subject to change.
So do we not yet have clear answer on existing authority?
We have an answer. I just haven't fully gone through.
Okay.
We're trying to get the final rule packages done. So yes, that's being reviewed this week.
Justin, can you repeat what you just said when David said, do we not have, I didn't hear what you said.
Yeah, so we do have an evaluation on LCB rulemaking authority pertaining to a number of areas with this topic. And so I'll be reviewing that this week, and we'll know whether or not, but we can start having discussions on which direction that we would like to take it from that policy standpoint.
Great, thank you.
I'm optimistic we have that authority. We won't need to go to the legislature, but smarter folks than me will decide that. But okay. Anything else? Any questions for Mark?
If I could follow up
Please.
on Mark's. So while Mark was basking in the England sun, we did hear some feedback from some stakeholders on the agency request. And so far it's been supportive for the excise tax exemption. Folks have been reaching out to DOH and DOR to kind of figure out what's the current state for what they do and how does that translate over to us. And I think folks have been satisfied so far that this would be acceptable. So we've had some concerns raised mostly around confidentiality for patients. And I know that we also had some internal kind of side conversations around looking at some statutes associated with confidentiality, with auditing and that kind of thing. So we're going to be talking about that later this week as well. But we've had positive feedback so far, nothing in opposition.
Is that feedback from patients or from licensees?
An association and somebody working with patients.
Okay.
And so it's supposed, the way I'm reading it is direct line of communication from patients and also from representation of licensees.
Okay, that's good news. Great. Okay. We'll move to a licensing update with Becky Smith, the Licensing and Regulation Director.
So good afternoon, Chair Postman, board members, Garrett and Vollendroff. I'm going to keep my updates pretty brief today. I did want to mention a couple of things, is that we don't hear much about what we do with small businesses. And I just want you to know that we have a lot of work going on currently with our small business, with the business liaison team and the Office of Regulatory Innovations and Assistance. And this Friday, we actually were invited to the Korean Chambers of Commerce to meet with them Friday afternoon in Seattle. Not the greatest day to meet in Seattle, but nevertheless, we have staff going up to Seattle to do a presentation. Just like the board and our agency, we think it's really important to talk to potential licensees about the work that we do and how to apply for a liquor license, answer any questions they may have. So we're doing that this Friday, and then in the middle of September, as always, staff are going to be going up and participating in the small business fair up in Puyallup. It's a Saturday. Again, they don't always fall on the days that staff wish that they would fall on, but staff are always really willing to go up there and do some education, have some conversations with potential licensees. And then I did want to give you also a social equity update. Because we have 6 applicants that have found a location. That's, as you know, that's been some of the concerns that we've heard about in the last few months, is how difficult it is to find a location. So to have six of these applicants moving through the process is really exciting. That we have applicants in Franklin County, Pierce County, Benton County, and 2 in King County that have located places to operate their retail business. And then I was told that for 2 of the applicants, the one in Benton County and one of the ones in King County, they're going to be done in the month of August. And then we have 3 more that will be completed in September. So again, very exciting for those folks that were able to find a location. And then we have 14 others that we're going back and reminding them that even though they might not have found a location yet, that it's important that they get their paperwork in, because that's the timing of everything. You can find a location, but if you don't have your paperwork in, it's going to extend that time for when you're able to open. So again, reaching out to folks and seeing how we can assist them. And with that, I'm going to stop and see if anybody has questions.
Don't see any. Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Yep. Policy update, Justin Dornhorn.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So a lot going on in our part of the world. So I'll try to be brief on all of the fronts. From the rule standpoint, obviously, we covered all the timelines, but aside from that, we have been working on an intake form for internal rule ideas. And so that's in the final stages of approval. And so we'll have an online form that folks can submit their ideas and requests internally to. It's also going to have kind of a voting mechanism. So if somebody goes in and they see that somebody's already suggested that, they could kind of click a thumbs up to support that and give us an idea of what this would look like. So that's underway, as well as other parts of the process mapping. On the a couple of the rule projects, so on the THC front, there's still questions around the unlicensed, how our rules kind of apply to them, and they don't. So I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page, that our rules really apply to our licenses only, not the open market. That's where the statutory provisions, kind of land. And so on the research front, we've started completing some research briefs, and so these are literature reviews. We have 3 in the final stages, and so we'll be sharing those with the board shortly. The first one is alcohol outlet density. We also have a flavored cannabis vape products and also cannabis packaging youth appeal for those types of literature.
We got those today.
Oh,
We'll
good.
have them on the agenda for caucus next week to talk about.
Excellent. Okay. And then we also have some work on standard operating procedures around survey development and how that's going to be approached. And we're planning on having all of these published publicly so folks can understand how we're conducting the research and what goes into it. And then the SOPs also have timelines. So if a division wants to have an idea what it's going to take to do some of these, we can have some transparency on what that would look like for them. And then there are also on the research front, we're working on a dashboard as well to be able to showcase what we're looking at and where they are in the process. And so I want to put out a shout out to Mallory, who's been helping on both of those issues, and she's just phenomenal to work with. So I really appreciate her efforts there. On the tribal front, we have another MOU coming to you all at the end of the month for Soxswaddle. And so we're moving through some of these requests. So we're pretty pleased with the progress that's being made. Public health, we've got collaborative efforts with health and the industry. And again, kind of kudos to Kristen. She's been doing a phenomenal job on facilitating and coordinating, bringing these two parties together and creating understanding between both. And we had a really good crossover meeting recently. And we're still continuing to do that. And there's a lot of focus around the high THC products in those conversations. We're also doing some planning around the Healthy Use Survey with HCA and others. And then we have received some concerns around an upcoming webinar that's going on, and I've talked to some of the stakeholders about it. We had it in our newsletter, and we're trying to support traffic safety on providing some education around the 0.05 BAC bill. And so we're being really cautious about not advocating for that. It's just a matter of what the interest points are, particularly from traffic safety, on why this is important and trying to provide some understanding and education to the licensed community. I think it's being taken a little bit as we're positioning and kind of telling them that's not what it's intended to do. So if you do get questions around that, I'm happy to try to tackle those. And like I said, I did talk to somebody about it, and we're not trying to advocate, we're not taking a position, but we are trying to provide partnerships for educational purposes. We also have the Y Coalition meeting coming up on Friday that I believe David and I are participating in. So on the legislative idea front that I've been getting pinged about, we've got some drafts while Mark was gone on the Brewers front where they're looking at some food service issues. We have some concepts around hemp again. They're really preliminary at this point, where they don't want to change the thresholds or anything. They just want to be able to get hemp-based products into some consumables. And so they're wondering what our take is, and they're asking for some feedback. Had a conversation around research and scheduling. So if it goes to Schedule 3, what will that look like? What kind of impact, particularly for potential research licensees that we have, and will that shift the focus from LCB to elsewhere, which could be the Board of Pharmacy, if it's under the medical guys and they have a DEA permit for that type of research. So just for awareness purposes. And then we also have the spirits distributors we've had a meeting with recently regarding low alcohol ABV beverages and taxation. And so I think that we can expect to see some proposals on that. And then aside from those, we have, we're assisting licensing with some THC dialogue that they're going to be presenting on. I did start up the staff meetings again with the legislative staffers. So we're going to be doing that to create awareness and answer questions over the summer and through the fall. And then we also have, I'm going to be presenting on a conference panel for alcohol policy with a researcher in public health and a attorney for wholesale distribution in another state. So that's coming up at the end of the month. That's what I got.
On the hemp, that, when you first start talking, of course, it's alarming anytime I hear it. But now this is what, like last year, there was a bill introduced that didn't go anywhere, but that would have helped create a path for that, those sorts of products, which I think we need to, I know we don't, anyhow, we should look at those carefully and be supportive as we can. go back to what we talked about publicly when we got the THC bill passed, which was, we're not trying to put anybody out of business here. We're just trying to create, these lines. So there is a impairing, which all has to be 502. Then there's one for legitimate use in other products, and then there's shouldn't exist. And so anything we can do, in my mind, to help create that path through the legitimate products, not the farm bill loophole junk, but the legitimate stuff, we should do that. I think it helps us then crack down on the other stuff.
And I think that's where some of the confusion for folks come in, even those who are trying to develop something where they can create that pathway. I think the receivers of information still have this sense of, okay, what does this mean from hemp-derived products? Well, the statute that passed, prohibits any type of synthetics or synthetically derived. So most of that is gone. And so, when we're looking at these drafts, we have to keep that in mind, that they're not talking about, all of these intoxicants coming to market. And so, we're trying to take a look at it, but the language that I've seen is super preliminary at this point, and more conceptual than actual language.
Okay. I just if we keep an open mind, I think would be great. Member Volendroff?
Thanks for the update, Justin. A couple of questions. Going back to the internal submissions for rule petitions, if you will, is it mirror the process where the public puts in? I'm wondering again, like, who makes a determination whether something does in fact go forward, and does the board play any role as it does with the external process, or has that been figured out yet?
So it will not mirror the external process, because that's all statutorily driven. And so we want to have flexibility to be able to explore these options. And so the decisions, I think, will be discussed with board members as ideas are coming in. And then we'll be most likely be discussing those at management team as those come in for feedback as well. And so we are trying to incorporate tracking those ideas coming in, providing a feedback loop, and then looking at the assessments and how are we going to prioritize. So we're not going to look at the prioritization like we are with the project management, kind of format that we've been talking about, because I think that's too formal for this particular type of process, but we will have a prioritization. Of course, any type of legislative mandate rises to the top, and petitions come after that, and then internal stuff has to be looked at on a discretionary level.
Okay, that makes sense to me. I would like, I can't speak for other board members, but I would be interested in what's submitted, and maybe there's just a place I'm going to have to go to look at those things. But I would like to see what's being accepted, what's not being accepted, and whether the board plays a formal part of that or not is not as important to me as much as a mechanism which I can be regularly informed of what's being suggested. And I say that because as we've had conversations with staff at employee forums, this is an important issue for staff. Staff are saying we want an opportunity when we are seeing things that could potentially improve our processes. We want a mechanism to do that, and I think that I'd be interested in following this.
Yeah, and this will be visible for everybody. So when those suggestions are even coming in before we've even decided whether or not to create a rule project from that, those will all be visible for people to see on our internal pages. And so we're trying to make this as transparent as we can, both on what ideas are coming in and then which ones we would move forward with.
That's great. And again, I realize it's up to me to go to those places, but I'm asking if there's a process whereby they could be brought as well would be helpful, because I can just see in the busyness of work, not tracking that as much. And again, I maybe need to fix my own processes, and I'm willing to do that, but really feel like this is important. The second question I have is around the blood alcohol concentration and the 0.05. And I appreciate the fact that we're working with traffic safety and we don't have a current position on this. This came up last session, and I can't remember. Did we take a position last time this came up?
I think we did. Yeah.
I thought we did.
We signed in support of the bill.
That's what I thought we did
We
too.
didn't
And so the
We
reason,
ended up testifying that day, but
Correct.
we definitely were on the record.
That is correct.
okay.
We're trying not to advocate at this point, though. This is educational, and that's what I guess the differentiation versus the position that I was trying to call out, because when we created the internal newsletter, we were trying to and the joint communication with traffic safety, we really did not want it to come across as agency advocation.
Yeah. And I appreciate that at this particular stage of the game. I was just trying to remind myself what we did last session and to start, to have the discussions. What are we going to do this time around?
Right, which will need to be also in part with the governor and the rest of the cabinet.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
New governor. That's right. New governor at some point. Yes.
All right. Thank you, Justin.
Anything else? Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you. We'll move to enforcement and education with Director Chandra West.
Good afternoon, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. Thank you, Dustin, for driving slides today. I sure appreciate not having to present and drive slides. I did abbreviate the slides today because we do have a presenter coming to inform the board on a topic at their request from our last board meeting. So we'll go ahead and get started. When we take a look at complaints, we can see that we have separated out the complaints that our consultants are addressing with education alone. And so you can see the layout for the months of May, June, and July being in the brighter blue. When you look at cannabis, 70% of our cannabis complaints in July were internally generated, and most of those related to pesticide results that we're seeing and following up on. And then 50% of our tobacco and vapor complaints were internally generated just based on those premise checks that we're doing there. And then you're going to start to see something a little bit different in here because examiners are going to be doing some of those regulatory type education follow-ups with some of the alerts that we're seeing too. So you'll see some very specific numbers for reactive contacts that our examiners are making as well. Going to the next slide, you will see the percentage of our complaints that are coming in related to public safety. Remembering that complaint is a word we use to describe our cases. So complaints sometimes come from the public, sometimes they come from licensees, sometimes they come from our officers or consultants that see things when they're out in the field. But 56% of those, a higher number of them in liquor, as you can see, are related to violations that we have defined as public safety violations in Washington Administrative Code. When we move on to look at education violations together, you can see that they're over on the right when we look at the comparison between 2022, 2023, and 2024. The AVNs are staying pretty constant year to year, but that use of that educational notice to correct tool is increasing. So we like to see that. And of course, warnings, remembering that our goal is to reach compliance and to walk alongside our licensees as they reach compliance. And then a 14% increase in education from 2022 to 2023. And it looks like we'll have another increase in education this year if things continue on the path that we're on right now. If we look at a further education contact breakdown year to date, it just compares each of the industries. When you look at the different years 2022 to 24, and we've got those consultants broke out again, so you can actually look at the cannabis unit officers and the cannabis units consultant and see that each of those teams is doing their own amount of education and being very consistent and active in that area. So that's what we like to see. And then, of course, looking more specifically at the work they've been doing the last 3 months. All right, I lost my notes. You can see that in the month of July, Enforcement Education Division conducted 375 hours of education, which is great work. We love seeing how much they're getting out there in the field and educating and having contact with their licensees directly. Then when we look at what they're talking to them about when we are out there working in the education arena, you can see those regulatory topics, public safety, youth access, the standard reasons and that we're making contact. Again, lots of questions about licensing and permits and working with partners there. And then traceability. We've been doing a lot of work as it relates to the alerts. And so there is a lot of contact to explain changes that need to be made and making sure that they're being responsible stewards of their data. When we look at notice to corrects and the reasons these stronger education, we'll call it documented education, are used, have to do with traceability, an increase in advertising and record keeping, surveillance, things where we're really just making sure that licensee has an understanding of the work that they need to be doing in these areas. Looking more closely at violations for 2024, you'll see liquor and tobacco on the left with warnings in blue and then AVNs in black. You can also see over on the right for cannabis, warnings and AVNs, same color with the notice to corrects in teal there. So liquor wrote fewer than 10 AVNs in the month of July. Moving on and looking more specifically what those topics are, you'll see that youth access issue being number one, of course, and then traceability creeping up for number 2 just in July. And the warning topics we saw in July were also selling or purchasing cannabis on credit. That's something that we're doing some warnings on and doing a high amount of education on. And of course, some of our tobacco master services agreement violations as well. Taking a quick look at youth access, you'll see.
Chandra, real quick on credit, what is that? What are they doing?
I believe that is between the producer processors and the retailers and how that transaction is taking place, but I will confirm that info and make sure I get that back to you. Looking at cannabis compliance for youth access, we'll celebrate the month of July, looking at 100% compliance again. I've already received some reports for August that the news won't be so great next month, but we'll go ahead and celebrate a consecutive 3 months of 100% compliance. Taking a look at tobacco and vapor, staying solid in the mid 80% compliance for the checks that were done in July. Just a quick look at premise checks. We continue to see folks getting out into the field and having contact with licensees. This is the work we want to see them doing so that licensees have the opportunity to ask questions and we have the opportunity to see what's going on in the industries. And this is great work. And you'll see the examiner slide looks a little bit different this time. At a glance, you can tell by looking where, if you look at these without the breakdown of numbers, you can tell where the majority of the requests are coming and what work is driving the examiner's work. So if we were to look at the 2 longest bars, we can see that cannabis enforcement and industry contacts are the 2 big drivers. And then if you wanted to look more specifically at what the content of the work is, they're starting to break it down by number. So they got 34 contacts from cannabis enforcement about traceability. Now we're working on getting some different colors in here so that there's not just so much blue so we can read the graph a little better, but this will it will allow us to look at and see exactly what's driving that work and how we're spending our time. And of course, for 13 hours, we were in the field with our examiner unit, which means they're out there working with enforcement and comparing what's in the system to what's in the field, which is great to see. The advertising requests that are coming in for these employees are general ads for cannabis, outdoor ads for cannabis, and liquor rebates. We're seeing an increase there. And then when we look at the work our FDA unit is doing, again, that's an additional enforcement by contract for tobacco and some vapor. The compliance rate there, even though those are completely separate from our officers' compliance rates, it's very consistent. And so that tells me when I look at those two rates that that consistency tells me that we have the correct number there. Not that we need to stay there, but that it is a consistent and correct measure of the work the licensees are doing in the tobacco and vapor industry. Again, being transparent about where we are with any internal complaints and what those outcomes are. We do have one ongoing investigation right now. I don't have a new resolved one. And then looking at hiring and recruiting, you'll see that we have 29 vacancies. 21 of those are our law enforcement officers. 2 of them are lead compliance consultants, referred to here as an ARA 4. 5 of them are ARA 3s. Those are compliance consultants, and then 1 FDA inspector. We have that higher number of compliance consultants as we're going to go ahead and start utilizing compliance consultants in the liquor industry as well to provide additional education there. So that's why you see that higher number of those positions this month, and that's a transition we're working on making for August of this year. I'm sorry. We do have 7 folks in the background, so we are working on hiring, and we have 5 people at the academy right now. We're headed up to a graduation tomorrow, actually, which is really exciting. So, and then finally, I'd just like to share some quick partnerships and notable things that our enforcement unit is out there doing in the field, including partnering with the Department of Agriculture, Department of Health, FDA, and the CDC on getting the diamond shrooms product out of our stores and informing retailers to take them off the shelves. We've had reports nationwide of those making people sick. We've been working some concerts in partnership with the Grants County Sheriff's Office at the Gorge Amphitheater. We partnered at Harvest Days with Battleground Police Department to address some criminal behavior that was happening. And then we will be working with Long Beach PD at the Rod Run to make sure that people are responsibly drinking liquor and that our licensees are responsibly selling liquor. And then the Spokane team partnered with Spokane Fire to do some of the same type of work during Hoop Fest. We worked with licensing to sit on an interview panel for the RVP Mass Program Manager, and Captain Zubay worked with some students at the Kiwanis Junior Camp to inform them about the work that the LCB does. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Any questions for Director Wax? Seeing none. Okay, thank you. We'll move to Deputy Director Tony Hood for general agency updates.
Thank you, Chair Postman and members Vollendroff and Garrett. Earlier, our portfolio management system was discussed. We call that our strategic portfolio management system. It tracks and helps us prioritize our projects. Mallory is helping us set that up. We had a great presentation from Mallory and Jessica yesterday. I think it was Tuesday. And they explained to us how the software of Decision Lens will help us with looking at our projects, putting enough information in the system, and then basically grading them. We can all chime in through the management team on how we are going to grade or rate them, and then we can talk about prioritizing them. And so we're very much looking forward to that. We have a half-day meeting set in November for the management team to go through the bulk of those. We're also going to put our existing projects in this tool so we can see how our existing projects match up against the new ones that are coming, especially regarding resources, because that's an important thing that we have to measure and take into consideration. We also, second issue I have is SMP update. The project is still going well. The schedule is still a tight schedule. I did get a report out on Monday that led me to have more questions about the schedule, given the graphs that we were shown. Sometimes the graphs are very high level and it leads me to have some questions. So, Director Lucella and I are going to meet with some of the Accenture executives on Friday to have a touch base and make sure they understand our concerns about the tightness of the schedule and what they are indicating that they can get done by the March 31st rollout date. And this morning we had a town hall for SMP. I thought it went very well. I was very, very happy with all the staff questions. I felt like that meant that they were engaged and also curious about the system. They asked a lot of questions about, will this automatically do this? Will it automatically do that? And there were so many yeses to those questions. It made me so happy. And they got to see it. Yeah, they got to see it working. Well, it was a recording of it working.
Well, that's true.
Yeah, just to be fully transparent. It wasn't live, but still, it was exciting for them to see the recording of how you can go through the system and so much automation in it. And without those questions that we got from staff, we wouldn't have had such a great discussion about the features. And a big shout out to Beth Lehman. That's her, I'm saying her last name right? Lehman. Now I got nervous and thought I was going to mispronounce it. Beth did a fabulous job today answering all the questions. She's our product owner from licensing. When Jeannie left, she had to jump in and learn all about this, and she really did. Yeah. And she answered so many staff questions today.
Dan from enforcement too was on top of it. It was nice.
Dan was very on top of it. Yep, they're a great team. And so I appreciate everyone who pitched in for that town hall. It's a great way to share information with our staff. We had 210 people at the high amount of people on that town. We've never had that many people at the town hall. So super happy about that. Regarding traceability project, I actually have a slide for this one, which is the QR code. This is what Dustin Brown, our community engagement specialist, created. And he, of course, is working with Candace, the current project manager in E&E. And they created this so our external stakeholders can use this QR code and answer the survey. And so, yeah, good job seeing if the QR code works there. We have an internal one and this external one to gather information from stakeholders. Again, that's part of our stakeholder engagement. Super excited to see the analysis that he's going to do from that data. And also excited to announce that we have hired a new project manager for the director's office. And her name is Crystal Boyston, and she's coming to us from ESD. And I will have an announcement with more details about her bio, et cetera, at the end of the week. She's currently on vacation, so I haven't quite got that from her yet. I think she gets back today. But we had a great group of people help me interview 2 rounds of interviews, had great candidates, and we're very happy that Kristen accepted the job. And then soon we'll officially transition the cannabis traceability project from E&E to the director's office. And that's all I have.
And Director Lucella.
Sure. Well, good afternoon. Deputy Director Hood touched on some of the things that I was going to talk about, so I'm just going to gloss over that, which is perfect because that's the benefit to going last, right? So, I mean, SMP, I do want to give a shout out to the SMP team. The work they're doing is phenomenal. It was great to be able to see the video demonstration, air quotes, but it gives a really good flavor to what the project and is going to look like. So looking forward to that. I've been spending a lot of time in the employee focus groups and participating in those throughout the state. Special shout out to Board Member Vollendroff for participating and facilitating as well. I think we're going to come away with a lot of good insights that we'll be able to share with the board at a later date. So great positive process. Chandra mentioned I'll be spending some time at the Belia graduation tomorrow. I'm looking forward to those. It's a great opportunity for me to be able to see staff in the first part of their careers. And it's really fun for me to be able to do that and spend some time with the family. Other than that, lots of meetings still, state agencies, the governor's office, talking about everything from rescheduling to interstate commerce, and more to come. That's all I've got for today. Any questions?
Any questions for the director? Don't see any. Okay, great. We got one more thing we're gonna do today, and I'll have Director Wax come back and kick it off, and she can introduce Matt McCollum and what we're going to talk about here. It's all yours.
Yes, I'd love to. Matt McCallum, if you could turn your camera on and get ready to present. Matt leads our education unit, which formerly was solely a cannabis education unit that had our compliance consultants, and more recently that team has grown and we've added liquor compliance consultants, and it is now a division-wide team. So congrats and thanks to Matt. He's done a great job building and leading and now growing that team, and he's going to present today on some more specific cannabis. I think a trend we saw last month in data, and the board asked some questions, so we brought a little bit more detail back for you.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll share my screen here so you guys can, I put a little presentation together. Oops, see if I can share. Sometimes when I share my screen, it blanks everything out. So, oops, it's sharing the wrong screen. Either way, you guys should be able to see it here.
Yep.
So, based off of some past numbers or some recent numbers, some questions came up related to spikes in education we providing on prohibited practices, specifically in cannabis. And so Board Chair Postman reached out with some of the questions about, well, why are we seeing some spikes there? Has something changed in the industry? And after talking with him, thought it would be a good idea to just kind of share with everyone some of the details on what we're seeing related to prohibited practices, why those numbers have gone up, and yeah, just kind of walk through sort of where the rubber meets the road with this specific law and rule set to provide a little bit of background. So, oops, and again, it's not showing the right screen here, but so real quick, and I know a lot of people know these, and they are based off of how liquor works, but the relevant laws and rules related to prohibited practices, 6950-328 and WAC 31455-018. And these are primarily designed, to keep the integrity of the tiered system in place, where one tier does not have too much influence or undue influence over another, and protecting sort of the financial direct or indirect interest between those tiers. And there's some key aspects to that are broken down in WAC, specifically gifts, discounts, loans of money, premiums, rebates, etc. Relatively recently in the laws of that govern cannabis, there's been an exception written in for some free, like they call it swag, but t-shirts and hats and things like that, as well as specific services or treats, and those are outlined in 6955-85. But for the purposes of this, those exceptions aren't really what we're talking about. Mostly what we're going to be discussing are relatively egregious or very clear prohibited practice issues. And so I wanted to share a little bit 2023 versus 2024 numbers related to what we're talking about. I threw conditional sales in here just because even though it's not a part of prohibited practices, sometimes those get lumped together. And for this, it's not really what we're talking about, but I wanted to distinguish so you could see our conditional sales education through NTC has not really seen an increase. It's really specifically prohibited practices or a combination of conditional sales with the prohibited practices and things like extending credit. And you can see a pretty drastic jump between 2023 and 2024. And my next slide is really, I think, going to highlight why we're seeing that jump. To understand sort of how we arrive at NTCs for prohibited practices, it's important to understand how complaints come in. So for prohibited practices, almost all of them or all of them, when we're talking NTCs or education, are going to be complaint driven. We do provide proactive education, but because of the nature of prohibited practices being sort of back end business deals between retailers and processors, it's not something that you can readily see just in passing or in an annual inspection. The primary source of this spike in the previous slide is due to a relatively new or more advanced partnership with finance, specifically the audit team. I've worked a lot with the audit team supervisors over the past year. They go out and do really good work in their audits and identify issues that they are not able to cover with licensees. They're going out and trying to find excise tax that was, missing or wasn't reported or wasn't paid. But through that process, they find other violations that need to be addressed. And we identified that issue with them. And so what happens now is when they finish those audit reports, they'll send them to me and I go through those and go through their results and pull out the pieces that are not covered by them. And we go out and try to provide education on the things that they found. So in those scenarios, they're sort of rock solid. It's been discovered that there's a violation. And through those, that's primarily where we're seeing that spike in the prohibited practices, because they're going out and finding in the receipts and finding in the financial details that compensation, illegal compensation is being provided between tiers. We also get complaints from licensees, and this typically shows up in the form of processors who are complaining that retailers are requiring them to provide discounts or kickbacks on sales, things of that nature. This is a little different than liquor. Liquor, we typically see the suggested influence coming from the manufacturer side to the retailers. In cannabis, it's a lot more prevalent to see retailers suggesting that processors provide that money's worth. So what we will get complaints from processors going, hey, I can't compete with some of these bigger groups because they have deals with retailers, or hey, this retailer is reaching out and saying they won't buy from me unless I fund a 20% discount on my product to the customer. And so we'll get those complaints from licensees. And then a lot of times when we're dealing with those complaints, the licensees who we're addressing the complaints with will then tack on and go, well, licensee A, B, and C are doing this also. Here's a bunch of emails and stuff proving it. And so that'll generate new complaints to go out so that we're being equitable with how we address those amongst licensees. And then kind of the last one is we do get, and this is typically from retail and former retail employees, but former employees of retail licensees coming to us and typically disgruntled. Maybe they were let go or angry at a previous boss, and they'll say, hey, and they'll send us emails and say, here's a shopping list, or here's a menu that either our license, our retail location would send out to processors, or here's a bunch of information about processors that are offering money's worth contracts that are not allowed. So that's typically how complaints come in. And by the way, feel free to, I can't see anybody when I'm in presentation mode. So if anybody has questions, feel free to jump in on the fly, and I'll also have time at the end. So I wanted to give some examples of prohibited practice activities, because it's one thing to kind of read it in the laws and rules, gifts, discounts, that sort of thing. But what we typically see, producer processor lending or giving money to a retailer, or a lot of times we'll see like a payback program where they're splitting essentially a discount at the till. Again, even in liquor, this wouldn't be allowed. It would be basically an instant rebate is what it's called in liquor. So you're getting a discount on the product at the retail location that's funded by what would be a manufacturer in liquor, but a processor in cannabis. Extensions of credit. So, hey, I'm going to sell this to you as the retailer. You give me back a portion of your sales as you sell it. We run into that quite a bit. We also run into extensions of credit between processors and processors, or producers and processors, but not as often. Volume discounts is probably one of the most common ones we run into. which is where we have retail licensees that are either demanding that if I buy X amount, you're going to discount it, or vice versa. Processors that are coming with a lot of times we see it as a physical menu. Buy this amount, get this discount. Buy more, get more of a discount. And we actually, my staff, it's happened in the past where my staff have had retail licensees flat out tell my staff, my goal is to run my competitors out of business, and that's why I'm engaging in these volume discounts or trying to engage in these volume discounts. A lot of times too, the volume discounts will extend across a brand or a series of licensees. We'll see exclusivity contracts. Hey, I'm the retailer. I'm only going to buy from you if you agree to only sell to my 5 retail locations or the 5 locations that I own, so that they get brand exclusivity and we're the only ones carrying this product. And then we run into kind of some more in-depth ones where licensees create secondary companies to give away items. We've had places that'll have sort of a shell store next door. You come in, and then the employees from the cannabis location will walk you next door to give you the items that the licensed location isn't allowed to give, but they're still acting as the employee. So pretty creative with the things that we see, but I just kind of wanted to give a little more specific examples so you get some context. Oops, direction. So what is allowed? They are allowed to give some things, and it's not like it's completely prohibited from giving anything. They are allowed to give items a nominal value. Typically, this shows up in swag for the bud tenders, like, hey, here's a shirt for a bud tender to wear, or here's a hat. Some small things, lighters, pencils, things like that. Now, they can't give them directly to the customer, and they can't give them to the retailer for the purpose of forwarding on to the customer, but they are allowed to give those to the staff of retail locations. A note on that, though, and we do run into this from time to time, retailers a lot of times will try to elicit those free items as a condition of doing business, and that isn't permitted. Participating in vendor days at a location is super common, and what that is the processor licensee who's selling the product is invited to the retail location to talk about their product with customers, and that's permitted. We do run into probably the biggest issue we have with that is they tend to try to give away swag to customers when they're doing that, which isn't allowed, but they are allowed to go and provide education on what they're selling. And then listing locations that carry product, that's another sort of incentive thing of, hey, if you sell only to us, then we'll advertise, for your business. So a quid pro quo on advertising. I wanted to share sort of what education we typically provide in these scenarios, and then I'll talk about sort of the different ways that these complaints I talked about the different ways that complaints come in, and we handle them a little differently based off of the information we have. But I wanted to share the education that we provide. We're really consistent with the education. We have an enforcement bulletin that was created it wasn't created in spring of 23, but it was updated because it was noticed once we created the education program. Kelly Hallows, who's the education specialist, has been going back through some of the old education and trying to update it. And so we added in 6950, 585, which has the carve outs I talked about for exceptions, and then specified a little better based off of what we're seeing. And then, worked with communications on that listserv notice. Upcoming, we're planning on doing a newsletter this fall. So with this spike in NTCs, it doesn't indicate that the practice is going up. It's just through education and through our work with other divisions and our partnerships with other divisions and our increased communication, we're doing a better job of identifying what's already happening. I don't want it to be perceived as though this pretty significant spike in education is because we're seeing activities that haven't been done in the past or all of a sudden are being done. It's just with our resources out there, and as we grow as a program, we're able to identify and address them better. I also wanted to emphasize that when we give education, it is almost predominantly done in person, face to face with the licensees or the managers at the location. And that includes delivering an NTC, which is just formal education. And we're consistent with our language, and we make sure that all the resources that the licensee needs, like the bulletins, like the WACs and RCWs, are included in the education. What you can't see in this one, this is just a cut and paste of an NTC form. Below this is the actual WAC and RCW verbiage. Even though we include the links in there, we put it right in the document so they don't have to search for it. And we give that to them either physically and digitally, or digitally. Again, after meeting with them. I also want to mention too that when we go out to address these complaints, or any complaint, we try to check and see if they've received an annual inspection in the last 6 months to a year, so that while we're out there, we're going to go ahead and cover proactive education of other WACs and RCWs while we're there. So for external complaints that I mentioned before, things that are coming from licensees or, former employees or even anonymous, those are assigned to education staff, not commission staff. We determine if the complaint has enough information to write an NTC or not. Most of the time, it does not. What that would look like is if they supply emails between each other that show the menu, that show what's being offered or what's occurring. That's a little different. We may be able to have enough to write an NTC for that. But typically, external complaints don't have enough info. So what we do is we visit the licensee in person and discuss the complaint. And we ask them, are you engaged in this activity? This is the complaint. This is what the concern is. If they say, yeah, we're doing that, then we're going to issue an NTC. If they say no, we're giving them the exact same education that would be in an NTC. We just can't write them the formal NTC because we haven't determined that 100% a violation actually exists. But either way, they're receiving the exact same education. Again, it's a little tough because our education staff are not going out and investigating. They're not pulling financials and doing the work that auditors or officers do. And so they're simply providing the education there. Internal complaints are a little different because if we're generating internal complaints, 90% of those, if not more, are coming from those audit reports, or are coming from places where we have a definitive violation that's been identified. And so for those, like, I will review the audit reports, and then we assign complaints out to the appropriate education staff. Again, visit the licensees in person and discuss, and then we provide the education through a formal NTC. I did want to add that in either of those scenarios, if we get a complaint again after we've already provided them the education, and remember at this point, they've been given that education during finals, during annuals, and then based off of any complaint that came in, then that may be escalated to commission staff, especially if it's, we've shown that there's a violation, we have evidence that there's a violation, and they continue to do it. So with that, I know I kind of threw a lot of information at you, but I want to make sure that I give you guys the opportunity to ask questions. There's a lot there, so.
Good. Thank you for that, Matt. Really interesting. Question from Member Garrett.
Matt, how long have you been in this role of doing this?
So
or are you in the education or what?
So yeah, I'm the education manager for the enforcement division. So I helped design the education program under which the consultants moved out from under commission lieutenants and became a separate program within enforcement, so that my staff don't report to commission staff anymore, but previously they reported to lieutenants and were under lieutenants. So we are 100% education only. We don't do anything punitive other than we're going out, and an NTC kind of looks punitive because it looks like a ticket, but it's because the RCW specifies exactly what we have to have in there.
So this I guess what I'm getting to, so what you're providing to us is after the enforcement reform and education was created and on and on.
Yeah, so after the consultants became a thing, they existed under commission staff, and then we moved them about a year and a half ago, under their own program, and I helped design and then now manage that program.
So are you or your staff, are you seeing where the industry has overcome the fear of being able to say, yes, that did occur, and work with you all? Or is there still a fear of acknowledging that I'm gonna lose my license if I say yes and things like that? Are you seeing more of a trust in the industry
Yeah,
under the
yes.
education?
Yes. This topic, I wouldn't categorize this topic under the trust thing. Overall, yes. And we get a lot of positive feedback from our licensees about this program specifically, because we're designed to help them and help them achieve compliance through education. And they are very open to discussing issues. And we make it very clear that my staff is education only. And our commission staff have done a fantastic job of the transitioning to where, hey, if it's not public safety, or if it's not something, real eminent or severe to the public, we're going to try to utilize the education program to go out and make that contact. That doesn't mean our officers aren't great at education also, but they really do have bought into using our program as a tool. And the licensees, I hear from a bunch of groups and licensees all the time about how much they enjoy working with the consultants. This is a little different because most of them, when we're dealing with it, they know they're not supposed to do it, so they're not going to admit to us that they are. And so it's a little different in the sense they're not worried about getting in trouble or not. They know our consultants don't write violations. The outcome from our consultants is the same whether they admit it or not. But prohibited practices isn't something new. They're all very aware of it. Occasionally, we'll get ones where they go, "Oh, I didn't know I wasn't supposed to do that. I'll stop." But most of the time, they're aware of it, and so they're not going to admit it to us when they know they're not supposed to do it.
Right.
But that's more of a product too of they're very aware of the amount of work that would go into investigating a prohibited practices complaint. You're talking about an in-depth financial investigation that takes a significant amount of time. So we try to approach it through education, but if they know what they're doing isn't allowed, it's pretty hard to catch them.
Right. And I think I'm more leaning toward the ones that didn't know. And
Yeah.
I just recall in the past and through litigation, we would see things like a store that just opened up and had signage advertising.
Mhm.
And they didn't know it was illegal, and it was reported to us. And we came out and we asked them, did they have that sign out, and showed them the picture, and they said yes. But then they ended up with an AVN.
Yeah,
So
and I can talk to the advertising, and just so you're aware too, I was the original advertising coordinator for enforcement in cannabis when that position was created, and then I've overseen it the entire time since then. And I can definitively say, with advertising specifically, we go above and beyond to exhaust every opportunity to work with them and correct on it. AVN is like the last thing we want to do with anything advertising. So we provide them the education and annuals. We go out and talk with them and write notice to corrects. If they need an extension to fix the signs, we always provide them the extension if they ask. We work with them to go, hey, how long do you need to fix this? We're not out there to get them. When things do escalate to an AVN, most of the time, and most of the ones I can think recently, when we go out to provide them education, it's much more in the line of, we disagree that the LCB has the authority to regulate this, and we're going to take this as far as we can. So it's already they've decided that this is the path that they're going to do, and it's not about what the law and rule says. It's about sort of making the argument that that the LCB doesn't have the authority to regulate it, or that the law itself is unconstitutional. And so rarely do we have them disagree. Yeah.
That's good to hear, and things that we are doing that way. On the producer and what giveaways, I'm looking at my notes. So with us knowing that there are going to be some more producer licensing opening up and on, And when we already know that there's a over whatever in the market, how, I guess for me, because I don't understand, how does a person or a producer distinguish what's different about their product than someone else's product and things like that? Is that when you said they invite them to come out to the store and talk about their product?
So, and if I'm trying to understand the question, you're saying how would a processor distinguish that their product is different than others at retail?
Yes.
So they're allowed to advertise their product online and other places, and they do pretty
Okay.
significantly. They are allowed to talk about it with retail licensees. Actually, they can have retail licensees come out to their facility and see how they make it.
Okay.
Those are all things that are allowed.
Licensees.
Sorry,
Okay.
what's that?
They can give product to the licensees to
Samples,
test.
yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. No, I was just, one of the things that I hear when we talk about opening up new and saying that there's not a market for it, the feedback, the comeback to me is, well, maybe what we grow is going to be better than what's already out there. So who are you to say there's not a need for more of the product? If our product could be better than what's out there, stuff like that.
Yeah, I
hear.
think in relation to increasing producer or processor licenses, not in tandem with retail licenses, the prohibited practices is really the concern there, because what we run into, or what the concern is that the large players in the industry, the bigger processor licensees, are able to leverage retailers or provide retailers with more money's worth things that aren't allowed, but they do that, and that would essentially push out somebody smaller. That's one of the concerns, and one of the reason prohibited practices is there. And because we have a set number of retail locations, that's where it's a little different than liquor, in the sense that the retailers have a lot more power over those processor licenses because they're a lot smaller number, and they're the consumer for the processors. And it's not uncommon. I mean, that's one of the most common things that people complain about to my staff, is how hard it is to compete with the larger businesses.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Member Volunteer?
Hey, thank you, Matt. Super interesting. And it's really nice to be able to see the work that staff are doing and to understand it a little more, because, I'm at a level where I don't get that level of detail. So super helpful. And also to see the cross-departmental work that's happening. You mentioned finance in particular, and how teams are working together is great. I have a question, and I appreciate the fact that you provided us the RCW and the WACs that kind of govern this. I just had a general question. I haven't looked at those in detail. Are the vast majority of the prohibited practice in RCW or rule?
So prohibited practices in rule, the RCW talks about no direct or indirect financial interests. And I'm sure Justin could do a better job of explaining the history of how those work out. But these are originally based off of the liquor industry. And a lot of the issues that we're running into would in fact be illegal in liquor as well, talking about instant rebates and some of that stuff. So, and actually that's one of the main tools that my staff has when talking with licensees who get a little confused or frustrated, or why can't I do this? Is even in liquor, this isn't allowed. And that typically is a good way of sort of conceptualizing that, hey, we're not out to get you in cannabis. We're not out to try to hurt your business. This is kind of a pillar of maintaining the tiered separation.
Okay. And I'm assuming that part of your role also, or information to licensees, is that if in fact they have a rule that they don't like, there is a process whereby they can ask for that rule to be, is that part of what you guys do as well?
Yeah, it's not uncommon. In fact, I've been working sending stuff to Justin's team more regularly. If we come to an impasse with a licensee where we're no longer talking about whether or not they're violating the current WAC or RCW, but a disagreement with what the WAC should be, or something that they want to see added to that, and sometimes there's a bit of time that it takes to get to that point. we always try to offer them the ability, like, hey, if you want to suggest language or you want clarification on something, we have ways of doing that, and we really try to drive them to that. And the same goes for sort of public records. We get asked all the time, well, you're singling me out. I'm the only one who you're going after. And say, hey, we would encourage you to go through public records and request. It's just kind of like speeding tickets. You're not going to get a copy of every speeding ticket written in your county to see that other people are speeding. But we're more than happy to put on display sort of that. And to that point too, recently, while I was the education specialist designing this program, we took all of the AVNs and hearings that Shell Werner does, and we post those online now as well. So that's all very transparent, so people can go and see that process before it goes to the more formal version of that. So
That's great. Well, thank you. Appreciate it. And appreciate you coming today.
Matt, are prohibited practices considered a public safety violation?
No. They are. If they were public safety, that my staff probably wouldn't be dealing with those. Public safety is like sales to minors and those sort of things. It used to be a little more serious because a lot of times it was an indication of hidden ownership and things like that, but they're not public safety violations. I can't remember what category the penalty would be. I want to say it's like Cat 4, Cat 5, but it's relatively low on the penalty list.
I think and which in a way belies the fact of how important this is to our system, and you started with this, we've got separate producer, processor, and retail that can't be crossed. We have 2 different tiers of producers. To Member Garrett's question about oversaturation of the market, I think she points out a good question. There are people in the industry today who think this practice is making it as hard as anything to be competitive. These are, if I could, tell me if you think this is an overstatement, these are anti-competitive behaviors. That's why we have rules against them, correct?
Yeah, and that's why I tried to share the anecdote of it really isn't uncommon for licensees to make it very well known that they want to run their competitors out of business when we find them doing this stuff. So they're highly competitive. Most of the complaints we get across the board for my team are generated by licensees. Prohibited practices is a little different because we get the majority of those from audit reports, but all like advertising violations, all that kind of stuff, licensees are kind of at each other's throats a little bit. It's very competitive, and because there's a set number of retailers out there and there's a larger number of people manufacturing the product competing for shelf space, those with and it's not always the case, but those with money or means or who are willing to cross into the prohibited practices, you can see how it would make it harder for someone who's trying to be compliant or maybe doesn't have the resources to give bulk discounts and things like that. How do they compete at the same level?
Right.
And
I mean, you have a tier 1 grower and a tier 3 grower competing anyhow, which is got its own problems. And then this makes it even harder.
And that's one of the complaints that we get from licensees when we processors specifically, when we go to address this with them is, well, how am I going to compete when everybody's doing this and all these people? I can't compete if you're not going to stop them from doing it too. And that's where it's hard for us because we say, hey, we encourage you to let us know if you see it, but the industry is not keen on sort of holistically going, here's all the people that are doing doing this stuff. And so it's really when we see it, we deal with it. But this is a very hard one to see because we can really only spot it ourselves through like audit reports and things like that.
Which I'm so, thankful to hear about how close you're working with the finance group and that they had the sharp eye to find these and bring them to you. Because it is, unlike a lot of these things where we get complaints from licensees about others, like, oh, they got a big sign or whatever. I mean, this has a pretty direct impact on some of these processors, some who producers, one who said to me, I know it's not allowed. I know it's terrible, but if I don't start doing it, I'm out of business. I think it's fairly dire for some of the growers. So one of the, and I was glad to hear you say that, we don't see this necessarily as a sudden burst of this activity. It's that we're now got eyes on it in a way we didn't before. But I wonder should we look at NTCs on prohibited practices and how many of those might have involved franchise or management agreements where you have a concentrated, but I would just say as a layperson, the ultimate layperson in this, that when we had a cap at 4 stores or 5 stores, that's one thing. But if you've got the buying power for a dozen stores,
Yeah, it gets complicated because most of the ones that have management contracts don't submit them, and that's education we provide when we find out people have an intellectual property or management contract. Two, those can be really complicated in the sense where more and more we're running into processors that are engaging in contract grow. So you're struggling as a small grower, I'm going to pay you up front, and you're basically just going to be an exclusive grower for my processing business. And we address that stuff when we see it, but it comes out in weird ways. Like, we'll have an advertising complaint. We'll go on the website, and all of a sudden we notice that a processor is advertising jobs for 3 or 4 grows, and they're the hiring body for those 3 or 4 grows. So we don't have the resources to investigate these proactively, so they kind of come up on their own. It used to be a big SIU. We had the SIU team that did that, but when the penalties for hidden ownership and some of that were downgraded, it kind of became clearly the priority isn't as much on hidden ownership as it was originally. And so, I mean, that's a discussion to be had, I'm sure, but that just historically, that was one of the issues we ran into, is the feedback we'd gotten related to how serious of a penalty hidden ownership and some of this was downgraded. So we adjusted accordingly.
and that may have been appropriate at the time if in fact there was a cap on stores of 4 back in those days and then 5. The sort of damage done is somewhat limited, but now if you can be buying on behalf of a dozen plus stores, it is more of a financial situation. There's more money to be made or lost in that. But okay, I don't want to keep you longer. We should follow up and talk about management agreements too, and see what we can do to get them to submit those. Make sure we're looking at them carefully. And you did say that you're going to do another newsletter on this, right, in the fall? Good.
Yeah, it's already listed, and Kelly has that on her docket for the cannabis newsletter.
Good. Okay. Thank you for this. Thanks for the time today, but also for your work with finance and getting this kind of driving. It's really impressive, and really like what your team is doing.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And if anybody has follow-up questions, or you ever see other data that we kick out that you have questions about, I find it I'm really excited that the data that my staff's putting out, we're able to receive more detailed questions from your guys' group, because I think that shows that we're reporting more accurately and more effectively to let people know what's going on. And I'd also say, if anybody I know Director Lucella just came out with one of my staff members in Spokane. Feel free to invite yourselves. We will accommodate whatever you need and take you out and show you whatever you want to see or whatever we want you to see. So
we're a mix of the two. Okay, great. Yeah, this one certainly sparked my interest. So keep the stuff coming. Appreciate it. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Great job, Matt.
Thank you, Director Wax, too, for that, and for your team. Any last questions or comments from anybody? Board, Director, anybody? No? Okay, with that, we will adjourn until we're back next Tuesday for a caucus meeting. Thanks, everybody.